Okay, to allege is kind of like accusing someone of wrongdoing
Oh,
or claiming that they've done the wrong thing or something illegal.
oh,
So alleging is really important when you're talking about criminal or illegal acts, because otherwise you could accuse, you could say that people have done things that they aren't found in court to have done, and then they could sue you. So when they say that discrimination against women has been alleged in hiring practices, what they're saying is that this is a claim that people are making that that when people are hired for jobs, there's a discrimination in that process. They're not saying it's been proved, and they're not saying that it's true. They're saying it's a an allegation. It's
no
a
evidence.
claim.
Mm,
There might be good evidence, but it's not proved.
mm,
Yeah, so it's like it could be it's like arguing, except because it's the implication is of something wrong. It's not really an argument, it's an
mm,
allegation.
mm,
That's the difference.
mm.
So you could allege that your colleague stole your lunch out of the fridge at work, um, but if you haven't got proof,
It
it's
happens
just
a
an
lot.
allegation.
Yeah.
And there might be good evidence, but it might not be enough to prove anything. So so then so this is setting up the entire paragraph as being about hiring people, not employing them. That is, it's about the process of deciding who gets to work for you and who doesn't, which also helps to make sense of what happens in the next sentence. So in the next sentence, a change in the way that symphony orchestras recruit musicians, that is how they decide who works for them to begin with, not how they generally work with their employees, um, provides an unusual way to test for sex-biased hiring. So, and it would be a change in something. We usually, when we're talking about a change in a process, it's not something that happens onto the process, it's something that happens within it.
Mhm.
So that's the right preposition there, a change in the way symphony orchestras recruit. Employ would be grammatically fine, but it would imply that you were talking not just about when they were given a job originally, but also about the conditions that they continued to work under. So because this is about hiring, recruitment is a better synonym for hiring than employ, even though it's employ is sometimes used as a synonym for hiring.
So,
Okay, first they recruit you, and if you're successful, then they employ you.
okay,
So the
as a
recruitment
TA.
process is how do you decide who works for you? The employment process is the whole um, state of being employed.
Mhm.
So you become an employee by being recruited. And if you've just been recruited, you might be referred to as a new recruit. That is, you're an employee, but you've only just arrived.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so if you're hired as a TA, that process is called a recruitment. Uh, in universities, they've been very careful about this lately because um, some people have been
Mm.
claiming underpayment or unfair treatment. And so it used to be that whoever was the most powerful person in a department, they got to decide if their PhD students got jobs or not. But now there has to be a more transparent process, and they have to put everything on record with HR. So recruitment has been changed in universities as well, not because of sexism or discrimination
Mhm.
against women, but because of other forms of discrimination.
Mhm. But what about
Um,
the employment at the university for these people after recruitment process? Which part will you refer to as a employment?
so employment is then all of the period that you spend working for the university.
Mm, okay.
So And employment relates to things like, are you being paid appropriately? Under what conditions are you working? Yeah, so
Got it.
recruitment is the initial decision, employment is the actual state of being an
Correct.
employee. Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay. The next sentence, to overcome possible biases in hiring, this is about a change to practice that happened at a particular period in time. So if they were concealing their audition policies, that would imply the opposite, actually. It'd imply that they weren't publicly responsive in terms of who they hired, but what they've done instead is they've revised them, they've changed them during these decades. So some time ago, 1970s and 1980s. Yeah, so it's the hiring process for a musician involves audition. That is, you go and play so they
Mm.
can hear you play.
Mm.
And it's often very competitive and very challenging. So orchestras revised or changed or updated, we could say, those policies, that is the way that they recruited people, during the 1970s and 1980s. And I imagine that that's partly to do with changes to legislation around sex discrimination. So, for example, in New South Wales in 1977, there was a really important piece of legislation that made it illegal to discriminate based purely on whether someone was a man or a woman. You had to have other good reasons to include or exclude people. So the policies would have changed around that time for the orchestras as well. And then we go on to what that change involved, what it included, a major change. So this is one of the things that was changed or altered in policy is blind auditions. So blind, that is, you don't see the person who's playing when you're listening to their music, so that you're supposed to make a more objective decision about whether they're good at violin or oboe or whatever they're playing, rather than deciding based on what they look like. And I know that this has been done in casting for TV and films as well, for different reasons. In TV and films, they do blind casting partly to avoid racism. So I know that some productions will deliberately not name the gender, race, sexuality, identity, all the identity categories of the characters when they're auditioning. My child is part of a children's choir, and every year they have auditions for the soloists. So if you want to sing by yourself in the performance, you have to go and do a short performance. And then the people who run the choir decide who gets to solo and who doesn't. So it's similar here with the orchestras. What they're saying is that they're using blind auditions. They're using a screen to conceal or hide the identity of the candidate. So because they don't want what a candidate looks like or what their physical identity tells the listeners about them, they're using it to conceal rather than reveal.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is getting more specific, because they say that they say that across those top orchestras in the United States, there's been that general change from 5% to 25% female musicians. But then they're talking about their own study. So this is actually a study they've done. We ask whether women were more likely to be advanced or hired with the use of blind auditions. So this is actually the aim of their study, to measure whether blind auditions actually work. So they used data from actual auditions, and then they've named some kind of framework, individual fixed effects framework. I think it's an analytical
Mm.
tool of some kind. We find that, so this is their findings when they did their study, the screen increases by 50% the probability a woman will be advanced. So it increases her chances of continuing through the process. Screen here, they actually mean something that blocks the vision rather than something that shows.
Oh.
So they're not talking about like a TV or computer screen. They're talking about a physical screen
Mm.
blocking the view.
Okay.
So yeah, so that makes sense that that could be confusing because mostly when we talk about screens, we're talking about like visual interfaces. But there's I guess, another sense that a screen is just anything. It's like a wall would block your view. A screen is something more temporary that does the same thing.
So,
Yeah, so that means that they're continuing through stages. So what we're imagining here, I think, is that the audition process, there's actually multiple stages.
mhm.
It's very competitive, and so they have early auditions, probably where people play whatever they want to, and then they have later auditions where they're given something specific from the repertoire to play. And then, so what they're saying is that if they block the view of the player, there's a 50% increase in probability that women will continue to the
Mm.
next stage.
Advance out means continue. Yep.
Yeah, advancing out of certain preliminary rounds. And
Mm.
the in this case, it's different to being knocked out or um, failing to advance
Mm.
um,
And
out of those preliminary rounds. So it's like they're continuing in a process if they're advancing out of those rounds.
doing a fold.
It's about probability and um, it's about this idea of multiplication. So twofold, threefold, fourfold, it means in this case, several fold probably means like twice as likely, two times as likely.
Mm.
Um, maybe between two and three times as likely
Mm.
that they'll be the winner
Yeah.
in the final round, or that they'll be hired. So when they say it enhances by several folds, they mean it increases the chances by a certain amount. Um, it's an old-fashioned way of talking about multiplication. Yeah, so the switch, when they say the switch can explain, what they mean is that this technique in hiring can can be
Explained.
no, they're not trying to explain it. They're saying that there's a change in percentages that needs an explanation. And they're kind of saying that this switch to blind auditions is probably the reason. So that switch, that change of technique explains the change in hiring practices.
Amazing.